Um, the concept of a dynamic language is best brought out by looking at some of the features that a dynamic language provides. The first being a dynamic type system, for example. So let's look at what is meant by. What I just opened is the Python interactive editor. I can type in Python commands in there and they will be executed for me right there. So if I type x equals 24 here, and then I say print x, well, no rocket science, it type back 24. But the important thing here is that x is an integer. It is a type safe integer, and the language was able to interpret that based on the value that I assign to x. So it is type safe. It is not like a the VB6 variant, if you remember. It is not like that. Similarly, if to the same variable x, if I let me just first create a definition of a class. So let's say class person, which has one function, def. So what I created here is a definition of a class. The class is the name of the class is person. It has one function which is say hello, and it does what it does is it takes the self parameter, which is the same as this in C#, if you're familiar with that. And all I say is print hello self.firstName. What you would notice here, however, is that I have not declared this first name member variable on the person class. I am using this first name variable, but I have not declared it anywhere. So let's see what happens when I call this function. So to that same variable x, I assign a person object, and I say x dot I get an error. It says person instance has no attribute called first name. Fair enough. We never created it. But the beauty of a dynamic language is that I don't have to go back and edit my class definition. A variable gets declared as soon as I assign to it. So I assigned x dot first name, and now I call that method again. And this time we did not get an error. It was able to find out the value of that first name variable, and it was assigned a string type. So it was all along this is type safe, and this is a dynamic type in which I can add new member variables based on when I need them and so on. So the dynamic type system is one of the features. Similarly, you can add dynamic methods, which is called dynamic method dispatch. So the session is more around DLR, so I will not go into a lot of depth around Python and features, but I want to bring out this fact that there are dynamic types within and dynamic methods that you can have within Python. Coming back to our presentation, the other service that DLR provides in .NET is that it provides us a hosting API, which allows me to use Python features or Python scripts within a C# program. So we will look at that hosting API and how it is used and so on. So let's actually look at all of these features as they're being used from within a C# application, a hello world kind of an application. Here we go. So let's go to the top of the slide. So this is a simple console application with a single main function. Just types in, just prints the first name. It has a single class called person, which has two properties, first name and last name. Not a lot of rocket science there. What I need you to notice is the references within this project. There's a reference to IronPython. IronPython is the DLR implementation of Python. And the other important thing to notice is the Microsoft.scripting reference. This is the hosting API which will allow me to host IronPython code within my application. So the important thing is that you can write entire programs, complete end-to-end programs within IronPython itself. You don't need a C# program like the way we are using here to be able to write code in IronPython. What we are trying to look at here, however, is how we integrate IronPython into a C# program, which is why we essentially have a console application using C#, created using C#, and it is hosting some IronPython code. Let's look at the main. So if you look at these using statements, there are two using statements here, Microsoft.scripting.hosting and IronPython.hosting. Both of these are used for incorporating the IronPython code. What we do here at the very first line of the main method is create a script engine, which is a Python engine. We also get Ruby.engine, similar to Python.engine we have here. And I don't know, there may be other implementations of other dynamic languages as well. So we first create a script engine, then we create a scope. Scope, as the name suggests, is just scope. It holds the, it is you can think of it as a container which will host the variables, and those variables will be available within that scope, and you can have nested scopes and so on. Again, that is a topic for another discussion in terms of how we should be using scripting scopes and so on. But the next thing you do is to create a scope. You need a scope to be able to declare any Python variables and so on. The next line is very interesting and probably the most important here, where I create the definition. You see here, what you see here is a string variable called definition, and to that variable I am assigning the definition of a Python function. So it's still a string. I am assigning the code that I had earlier written in that Python interactive shell. I have written the same code here, the same say hello function. This time it's just a function. It is not a part of a class, so it is not taking self. It is just taking x. It is it calls the x dot first name. But the important thing to note here is that it is a string. Then I call this create source from string. So what this is doing is that converting this string variable definition into executable code. And then I give this executable code to the scope. At this point, this is executable code that I can use somewhere else in my application. So what I do is I create a person object, person P. I assign the first name variable there. And then what I do is I create an action delegate, which is and I get the method that I had declared within that scope using that string type variable as an action delegate out of this up to the scope. And finally, I call that action delegate. So if I run this program, very predictably, it prints out hello Manish. So again, the program is in itself is not doing a lot, but the important things to note here is that we hosted IronPython as a scripting engine. Then we created a scope, and we used some string variable, some dynamic data which was of type string. We converted that into executable code at runtime, and then we were able to call that executable code from within our application. So keep these 3-4 things in mind, and we will see how all these things come together when we talk of a rich UI application and the power this is able to add within that UI application, the rich UI application. So I'll close this and go back to my presentation here. So let's talk briefly about what is, what a typical capital markets application is, and what are some of the key features of such an application. A typical capital markets application deals with a large amount of data, and the users looking at that data are not